Back to another episode of Tech Sales Advice. My name, of course, is Chris White, and I am today's host. And these conversations are live, folks. This is the pre-sales program or the live program for pre-sales professionals and pre-sales leaders. And we are coming to you live, as I like to say, by design. These conversations are unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And today's conversation is exceptional for a number of reasons. The gentleman who's joining us today is someone that I've known. Gosh, I'm thinking it's been over a decade. He was a VP of architecture when I first met him, and he was my client. We worked together for almost 5 years, and during that time, he and I became pretty good friends. And shortly after the time that we worked together, he made what some thought was an unbelievable decision to leave a very prestigious role at a very prestigious organization to become a sales engineer. And we're going to have to dig into that a little bit more. And in about 5 years as a sales engineer, he, working with his account executive, first has grown a territory from 500,000 to over 10 million in about 4 years. 2 years ago, he was the #1 sales engineer globally for the organization that he works with. And then he followed that the year after by being the #1 sales engineer for the Americas. His name is Stephen Brown. He's someone I consider a friend and I respect a great deal. And I'm so excited to have. Oh, and by the way, he wrote the foreword in my book. So he and I go back a long way. Stephen, my good friend, it's so good to see you. Thank you for being here. How are you?
Hi, Chris. Wow, it's really good to be talking to you this morning. I'm well. I'm excited. I have this wonderful opportunity this morning, and then it's back to work right afterwards. I'm totally excited for today and looking forward to our conversation. And nice to virtually meet everyone. Looking forward maybe to meet some of you in the real world or more one-on-one conversations in the future.
Awesome. And I know, by the way, I know it's hard to get time on your calendar. We have been trying to do this for a while. And I know when we finally blocked off your schedule, I suggested that maybe I shrink it a little bit. You said, no, don't open up any time on my schedule. So I'm glad you're here. And folks, what are we talking about today? We're going to hear a little bit about Stephen's journey. And if I slip and say Steve, I've known him for so long that he's Steve to me. But we're going to hear a little bit about Stephen's journey. And more importantly, we're going to be talking about consumption. More and more organizations are moving to a consumption model of revenue, which really changes the game. So, folks, buckle in. We're going to have some fun. I already see the first comment. Robert, I think that's blessed. Robert, thanks for chiming in. Folks, we can't see who's out there, so please, I want to encourage you, please say hello. If you have any questions for Stephen or myself, please don't hesitate to ask. So Stephen, if I may begin, I introduced you briefly, but do you mind just taking a minute to talk through the journey, particularly of making that decision to go from a very successful career as a leader in architecture, in technology, to become an individual, what we refer to as an individual contributor sales engineer?
Yeah. I'd like to say that I had my whole journey planned out, but life is what happens in between, making plans, right? So I was an electrical engineer. I came up through the dev and engineering ranks, architecture. I think you also know I was the VP of engineering, software engineering for the innovations lab at my previous company.
Right. Yeah.
And I had some very good mentors. I think mentors and peers influence you dramatically. And of course, I'm a little more of an extrovert than a lot of engineers. And so, over time, there's some certain things that kind of got ingrained in me and what I found to be successful. And that was, be customer centric. And when you're in the organization, your customers are your other internal peers, right? Or for me, I actually met with external customers as well. And interesting as that, either that architecture leader or an engineering leader, I found what empowered my organization and my projects was kind of a servant leader style. I was never really the command and control style. I liked servant leadership. People underneath me, how do I make them successful? And then another thing that's super important, and I think, and this translates, I'll talk how this translates, is learning how to influence your peers in an organization, right? Obviously, you can influence people directly below you and you can manage up. But the most important thing is influencing people that you don't have direct control or power over. I think that should sound pretty similar to things that we do in sales, right? And then, of course, the thing that I did every day in my job is break down barriers. So how did I make that decision to go? Kind of one of the classic life type things. As I was doing really well, I liked my job. I had a bad day. And I went to a kind of a little, I don't know what you'd call it, a kind of after work event hosted by Elastic. I started, and I had already got to know Elastic technology a little bit. And I met the peoples, and I met a salesperson and a sales engineer. And obviously I've known Chris, and sparked my interest. 8 weeks later, I landed this job. And I've loved it ever since. Kind of a few things that brought me, for me, I've been through DoD, commercial, startups, financials, but I never got to work for a true Silicon Valley company with an open source and that really kind of forward thing. So that drew me, but I like doing the individual contributor, and I like being in front of customers. So the interesting part is that whole journey on the buying and customer side, to me, has translated almost directly to the solutions architect. And it's funny, some of my friends were like, why didn't you do it? Because they've seen the light bulb go on, and I just have a whole new level of energy. Like, why didn't you do this sooner? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe that was my journey. But those core tenets, customer first, right? What's important to my customers is important to me. That came straight over, right? Being a servant leader, guess what? My set of people working for me, it's my customers. If I'm not taking care of them, if I'm not their person bringing their issues forward, then I'm not going to be successful. Breaking down barriers, that's what solutions architects do. I break down the barriers and then show the value of the technology to our customers. Either here's your business outcome, here's how the technology supports it, or here's the technology, here's how the business outcome supports it. So these things, my core tenets haven't really changed that much. So I guess I was thinking it would, but it hasn't. So that's kind of my journey. There was a couple of surprises. I will say, and in each of our jobs, there's hard things. It is hard to get a customer to sign on the dotted line and fork over their hard-earned revenue or their income for your revenue. And I really appreciate the effort that goes into that. I've been lucky to have small deals, little deals that happen very quick. And then I'm really in the big enterprise space now, where it could be 6 months, a year, 18 months. And they're all have some continuum of, but in the end, it's got to still close. And it is interesting how much effort that can take. I think that was maybe something that surprised me a little bit.
Yeah. Talk about, because you're paired directly with a single account executive. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Do you mind?
But now
Do you mind talking a little bit, because one of the things that you shared with me is that it took a little bit of time for you to develop that partnership, that trust, and get to where you two were on the same page. And it sounds like now you can almost complete each other's sentences. So talk a little bit about that journey, that evolution with your account executive.
Yeah, it's Bob. I'll just call him Bob. So Bob, if you see this, thanks for all the amazing influence you've had on me. When I first came in, I had a couple different sales. I was 2 to 1, and it was interesting. I came in, I kind of had super relaxed sales guy, and then I had the really kind of super focused, cross every T. And I worked through those, and we landed some decent sized deals, and then some things changed around, and I met Bob, and we actually worked together a little bit, and then they changed as they carved and changed, and that'll happen. That was a thing I've learned. Bob and I came back together and one-on-one, and everybody thought we would make a great match, but it turned out actually the first few weeks we were banging heads pretty good. And then, the kind of light bulb, we kind of had a heart to heart came on that we're actually much more alike than different. Although I'm very West Coast and Bob is very East Coast. And so some of those things, and there was some communication patterns. But when we kind of realized that we both actually have those core tenets, customer focused, and Bob says this, it's kind of interesting. We hate losing more than we like winning. And so we don't like to lose. We both figured that out. And, really not losing means making your customers successful, right? Making the company successful. Bob and I now, so it's odd. I think back, I used to schedule when I was going to have one-on-ones with my account. Bob and I run the board every morning now. So very equivalent to the stand-up that you have in devs. I think that's super important. I think some folks feel like you're repeating the same thing, but it sets the tone every day. It's just like the dev stand-up. What did we get done yesterday? What are we doing today? What's in our way that we need to knock down every day? And then we have our strategic talks of like, where are we going? Where do we need to build up some more pipeline? Those kind of things. And then once we got over that, it's good. And not to say there's never any tension. I think there should be a healthy tension. Like, hey, Bob, the tech part's really important. He's like, no, we need to get the legal done, etc. We need to focus on that. I think that's a healthy, if you can't have a bit of that healthy tension, and I mean tension in the right way, then you're probably not getting everything out of the partnership that you might want to.
I love that. I love that. I mean, I think the best partnerships between AEs and SEs are ones that they do challenge each other and keep each other on each other's toes, right? And I love that term, or that idea of sort of some healthy tension. By the way, Franklin De La Cruz is someone I've worked with. Servant leadership, totally the preferred leadership style. Franklin, it's nice to see you. Robert, I think I can't tell if it's BICE. I hope I'm saying that right. SEs remain engaged. Post-deployment helps build and continue trust and commitment to the customer, which is in value to upsell and future sales opportunities. Well said, Robert. Let's build upon that, Stephen. So we're talking about consumption, and I have a number of clients that are talking more and more about consumption. And SE leaders, SA, I know your I guess your official title is Senior Principal Solution Architect. So you're an SA, and I know there's lots of discussion around titles. A lot of SE leaders are coming to me saying, Chris, how can I help encourage and motivate my team to drive consumption? We are moving to a consumption model. What has that done from your vantage point? What has that done? What does that do to our role? How do we need to operate, behave, and think differently when we are supporting a team that is working for an organization that's following or moving towards a consumption model?
Great question. And part of me wants to say it shouldn't change at all, but it does. So I feel very lucky. Again, I have serendipity. I don't know how I plan these things. I don't. So I joined Elastic, open source, self-managed, and now, of course, Elastic Cloud. We just did our earnings. I think it was 42% of our total revenue is now cloud.
Wow.
So I've got a front row seat of going from kind of free to paid to cloud. Lucky me, right? So, it's interesting. In some ways, it's the same product and value, but it's a different product and value. And of course, I think, I shouldn't make any assumptions. So it was a little bit shocking to me. And I think I knew this innately, but until somebody said it out loud, that your company only recognizes the revenue from a cloud deal when it's actually consumed. My company, we get paid upfront $100,000, $120,000, and make it divide by 12. But that revenue is not recognized till the cloud is consumed, and that's like, and again,
major eye
I
opener.
knew that,
Yeah.
but like hearing it very clear, and we are slowly, like many in the changing kind of our comp structure to go from ACV sort of thing to consumption. Now, I haven't completely, there's probably other companies that are already out there. And then if you're not and you're selling cloud, it's probably coming. So, what is that changed? And I'm glad already people saying, yes, of course it doesn't stop. Well, good. There is no shelfware in it for SaaS services. My CEO says that to me.
I love that, by the way. I love that. There's no shelfware on the cloud. I just love that.
And so for me, and then, there's other roles. So let's say I to win a deal, I'm doing all those things that I should be doing, breaking down the barriers, but, showing the value. There's a lot I'm lucky. My product has lots of value. But sometimes there's barriers. There could be IT barriers. There could be security barriers. There could be, we're Elasticsearch. If you don't, we're a search engine. You can think of us as a data store. We power Uber, Lyft, Yelp, pretty much half the apps on your phone run on top of Elasticsearch. But there could be barriers getting the data in. There could be barriers, just organizational barriers, right? So, and when I sold licenses, I'd break those barriers down. We'd often bring PS in, get that rolled out. But there was this weird kind of feeling that you had a year, even though everybody wanted to get a project done in 6 weeks, you kind of had a year, one, whether it was a yearly renewal or 3 years, to kind of show your value. Well, with cloud, that starts day one, right? So, you might have professional services to get a project off the board. You might have CSM, customer success management. You may or may not. There might be varying degrees. At the end, Bob and I, we still own the dollars. And I don't forget that any day, right? At the end of the day, it's my account. It's my dollars, so to speak. It's my customer. It's our customer. You can tell I'm a little that way. So what am I doing? So one, I'm just gonna be blunt, it has added load to me because now I'm looking at my customers' consumption, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but obviously there's danger signs. If they're not consuming, that's a danger sign. If they're over consuming, I just went through this with 2 customers, really easy in cloud. Yeah, we got it, and they roll something out, they roll out the wrong version, the wrong architecture. Oh, we didn't realize that we rolled it out into 3 regions. And this big bill comes, right? So I'm actually finding using the consumption model gives me good reason to be in a very cadenced contact with my customer. For consuming, again, I'll go right back. Maybe they did a POV, but now they want to roll into production. What's the barriers to get them into production as soon as possible? And with a lot of things, I see the POV goes, and then there's this 6-week gap before we get going into production. I'm seeing that over and over in accounts. So, really getting people ready to roll over and get that consumption. Now, if you're doing a consumption model, maybe you need to account for that a little bit. It's kind of a weird tension, I'll use that word again, between, I want to make the best sale for my company and my customer. I want that number to be big, but if it's big and they lose that dollars at the end of the year, that's not so good either. So I work on some ramping. We're lucky enough to have, if you buy $120,000, say, for example, you can spend $1 on the first day and $119,999 at the last day, although that would be bad as well. But you need to keep an eye on those early couple months for sure. Are you at least on a reasonable trajectory? If you're under, you need to be in there helping, right? If you're over, it could be a couple things. They've done something like that, you've underestimated, or the best scenario is when they're growing, they're seeing value, and then the next department or the next org wants to come on and maybe get a chance to to re-up the deal a little bit earlier or what have you. But I'm hypersensitive to that consumption now, which, like I said, it adds more load, right? And it feels like it's post sales, but to me, it's not, because in a way, I'm selling that cloud every month now, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it
So it's, and by the way, Stephen, let me just pause, folks. I'm speaking to Stephen Brown. He's a senior principal solution architect with Elastic. If you missed the opening, he was the #1 sales engineer for Elastic globally 2 years ago. He fell down a little bit in the ranks and was #1 in the Americas last year. And we're talking about the consumption model and how our roles change, how they're similar, but also how they change a little bit when we're supporting and driving a consumption model. And if I heard you right, Stephen, you said you're in your most recent earnings release, 42% of your earnings roughly from consumption. What I hear you saying is that you really need to think more like, I mean, the word that comes, or the term that comes to mind for me is a technical account manager, right? We use the term pre-sales, but in a sense, it's infinity sales, right? I mean, once we close the deal, we can't realize revenue until the consumption happens, and we need to be removing barriers. When I hear you say that, to me, that means we need to be assuming problems and challenges on behalf of them, helping them to identify what the problems and challenges are, and really taking an active role in helping them remove those and avoid those challenges and problems. I mean, is that a fair summary of what you're saying?
Absolutely. And, I would, and again, there's other organizations that are part of this, but at the end, we own it. Yeah, it's a lot like a TAM, but I always had my hat on the expand and find more use cases and be really so successful with their use cases they can't help but to learn more. But I feel like I'm doing a lot of roles now that maybe when I just sold a license, I wasn't. But I don't know. To me, it gives me a place to be really engaged with the customer. You can have a very, really cool open conversation. Hey, I see we thought you were going to be at 10,000. You're about 5. What's going on? And have them open up a little bit. And especially if you take a little of that cognitive load off them. And I find in big organizations, sometimes we're the one going between the groups to help with that consumption. Like, this group or that group. Well, oh, do you need the cloud security questionnaire filled out, or can we help with that? Or, the other team isn't quite ready because they haven't worked on their schema. And, oh, great, let's go talk to them. So you can use those conversations to find those barriers, because nobody wants to be too far under budget. Nobody wants to be too far over budget. So it can come back to that budget, and you can use that to find the areas that you need to address.
Yeah. By the way, I love the term you just used, the cognitive load. Lighten their cognitive load. By the way, Stephen, let me say hello to Vark Tornston. He likes the term infinity sales. Vark, nice to see you. He's actually, so you're in California, I'm in DC, he's in London, so we've got a pretty, casting a wide net here. Steve, I have a question for you that you may not have seen coming. Is it safe to assume that Elastic has CSMs? Do you all have a CSM organization?
Yes.
How do you differentiate your role from the CSM's role?
Great question. And that's that organization is being retooled right now to become much more technical.
Okay.
So, traditional CSM kind of in the licensing was about renewals and kind of project management, maybe support calls and those kind of things. Elastic is a pretty technical sale. I sometimes wish it was less technical sale than it is. But the CSM, we're actually working on kind of like customer success architect role, which is much closer to
Mm,
that TAM. That's
okay.
in process. So that's why I think I'm still owning a lot of that. The goal would be have a role like that I would pair up. And I don't want, I'm always careful. I don't want to hand off, but as they kind of become more introduced into the account and start to really get that tempo going, that they would own more of that. But today, I'm actually working with a gentleman that has kind of joined in that role, and I'm walking him through kind of some of the things that we're working on these big organizations. And, we need to bring them up to speed on the technology and the account. And then I do hope then he'll take over that, looking at that role. And hey, look, the security group is running under, but the search group is running over, or what have you, to that role. So I do see that, but I think that's their evolution of their organization for consumption in a highly technical sale as well.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. And the reason I asked is that I suspect anybody listening now, or anybody who might be listen to this in the recording, may be, or at least begin to ask themselves, well, if we're so involved, quote, what some might argue is post sales, right? And again, I like the term infinity sales, but if we're so involved in continually selling, then where do our role and responsibilities sort of and or blend into the CSMs, right? So and I think organizations are going to continue to give this consideration. Another question comes to mind, and that is, you mentioned removing barriers to help drive consumption, particularly, and again, let's just say, let's stick with your 120K example. They've signed up for 120K. Idea, in a perfect world, that means they're consuming about 10K a month across the year. And one responsibility that you have is to, quote, drive consumption. If you notice that consumption maybe is dipping below the target, right? Maybe it's 5. But in other times, I think we're looked upon to help drive consumption via net new use cases, net new organizations within, or groups within that organization. So how do you sort of shift gears, or what do you do differently if you're actually trying to generate maybe additional, quote, consumption through additional maybe engagements or contracts, versus just remove barriers and drive the consumption that they've in essence already signed up for?
So, good question. Interestingly, I feel like it's more of a continuum, that it's not a one or the other type thing. So,
Okay.
so a couple things. And actually, I had an interesting story we can come back to. Well, let me, before I go to talk about new, let me talk about what's going on with, say, with a use case, right?
Yeah.
I find, as I kind of reduce those barriers and show more value, that use case will grow, right? If I'm doing my job right, unless it's already completely put in a box. But we live in the data world. I haven't seen anybody reduce data in years. So if you're anywhere in the data, the network ramps, it's getting bigger.
Wait a minute. Data is not shrinking?
Data is not shrinking. I'm
okay. I'm making a note of that.
And it's interesting to me as well. Like right now, I'm working on a use case where I'm actually helping them re-architect. It's going to reduce their monthly burn. It's like, but what I'm doing is allowing them to bring on more use cases. Just going to pull it right back up. So sometimes it's like, hey, can I do something that allows them to do more? And the moment you're letting somebody do more for that same 10,000, the value in their head goes up. And then they're talking to their peer. Holy moly, with Elastic, we just did this. We just doubled our customers on it. And the guy helped us work out so that I brought on twice as many customers. I'm only 10% more. That gets out to the next peer. Guess who wants to come talk to me about onboarding their data? So, good news travels slower. I think the saying is bad news travels fast, good news travels slow. But you know what? Good news can travel pretty slow or pretty fast too. So so there's that continuum, and we are actually internally having those discussions. Actually, I'm having that discussion later today with one of the RVP of sales, kind of curious how much post-sales, again, you're doing. I don't personally, Barrett, I don't, short of doing consulting, pre-sales, post-sales, it's just sales. Because I'm always just working on making my customer happy. If my customer's happy, they're going to buy more most of the time, right? If I'm showing them value, they want more value, right? So I don't, I can see you kind of said that too. That's a very blurry line to me, because plus I don't like giving up my customers. I like my customers. I look for an excuse to call them, right? So growing, and then, in the perfect world, if I had somebody on a pretty good, stable, we even had their trajectory, we do in enterprise. I mean, I'm lucky I'm in enterprises, big companies. You're lucky if maybe you got approved by the enterprise architecture that you're a standard. Well, that can take a long time. I love the great model of, department hopping, right? Next department that does a slightly different use case. We get a warm intro, look at the value, and they're helping us manage our budget to our value. Can I get good budget to value ratio? That's a good way to think of it, right? And that's a nice warm intro. And then, I dive in hands, feet, arms, legs into that use case. And then we probably usually start that POV cycle. The nice thing about cloud is POV tends to be much easier than setting up the old self-managed, right? So that POV tends to be very fast. Then you get down to signing, people, the budget, the getting the project. I actually find that's, I'm pretty good at selling the value of that. That's I don't want to say a danger zone. That's the hard time. Getting that correct model, getting that sign, and then getting them off the ground. I see that as I don't want to call it a danger zone, but that is a place where things can go off track. And so I just put in a ton of effort there, right? And Bob and I over communicate. We don't assume anything. We're actually, thank gosh for Grammarly and things like that. We try to be very clear in our emails, face-to-face conversations, etc., to keep it, and just hammer them with you need to talk to us when something's going sideways or what have you. And then once we get the project going, if you're onboarding data or users or use cases, getting a couple of those knocked down early. Everybody says quick wins. Let's find a valuable use case and get it deployed and show the value. I'd much rather say it like that. So it's all get back to your point, it's interspersed, and there's no clear lines to me. There never has been. You just need to find that space. And if there's space in the vacuum and you need to go in there and take care of it.
Man, I so love that. Folks, I'm speaking with Stephen Brown. He's a senior principal solution architect with Elastic. I just asked him, how do we change our approach if we're just driving consumption that they've in essence already purchased versus really new use case. And Stephen, I love your answer there, that it's really a continuum, that we need to first focus on making that first group, if I can use that term, successful. And really it's that first maybe 6 to 8 weeks after signing that really sets the tone for the project, right? And we're either, it's sort of like, I say this all the time, your first 2 to 5 minutes sets the tone for a demo, right? It sets the trajectory for the meeting. Are we going this direction or are we going this direction, right? And to me, that's what I hear you saying about the first, once we sign, we got to get them off the ground. We got to remove barriers and get them going. And if we can make them a success and help them discover ways to save money and do more than they thought they could, what are the chances that some of their colleagues in other groups are going to be interested in having a conversation as well, right?
Let me add one thing. Can I add one thing real quick?
Please.
Not to be remiss. I mean, obviously, if you've got a great professional services, get them in there. They need to come in early with you to demonstrate their value, just like the product demonstrates the value.
That's good.
The professional services need the value, and if they can get in and that helps a million things. But the weird thing I'm seeing sometimes with cloud, people are like, SaaS is easier. Well, since we don't have to run the platform, we have more time, energy, and etc. We'll take some training. We'll do this ourselves. So sometimes I'm having a little more trouble selling the consulting because cloud is supposed to be easier. Not always the case, but so it's a little bit of a danger sign when we don't get any professional sales. Obviously, our services, if you can get them in, that, if you have a good professional services team, get them in early, right? And that's an interesting, another discussion for another day. But if you don't, as Chris said, that those first 6, 8 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, super important. I don't even see that as post sales. I see that as the infinity sales. I just see that as the iteration. I think of iterations from a dev person. It's just iteration n+1.
Yeah. No, I just think it's so powerful. So my brain is firing in a number of different directions. There's one thing that you and I spoke about a week ago, and there was something that you mentioned, and literally I jotted down here in my notes that I wanted to ask you about. You said, Chris, it's all about removing barriers and creating slides. You use the term slides. And I remember the vision that I had in my mind was sort of greasing the skids, right? We want to remove the barriers so that it's sort of a down. Can you sort of elaborate on that point? Like when you say like creating slides, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, and we don't mean slides, it's PowerPoint. So I think of, I make
right, not PowerPoint.
yeah, we all do enough of that. If, we can do that. So I think about, it was analogies or whatever. I sell a box of 120,000 consumption units. It's like in a warehouse. Now I have a box full of product. Question is that box sitting at the top of a slide is going to make it very easy to slide down and consume all those products. Or am I pushing that consumption uphill, up the slide? Or is it just, is it just on a flat and I'm just going to put my shoulder in it and push it across? If you've set yourself up out of the POV, and maybe with professional service or not, and you think, hopefully that's sitting at the top and they're ready to reach in, and it's going to have it. If I'm showing value and I'm breaking down a few of those friction points, the consumption should have a gravity to it, right? If you find yourself already day one, you're starting to push that hill up. One, you should probably, maybe you weren't as prepared to make that sale as you thought, or just that transition from POV to like the classic InfoSec, cloud InfoSec. I never fall for that anymore. I don't want to finish a POV until we already have that in, because that can cost you 4-6 weeks day one. That's like kind of a classic thing that you like, day one, we're ready to go. And they're like, okay, now fill out your cloud InfoSec form and we need to iterate on it X amount of times. And you were thinking that was part of the contract, and InfoSec's like, nope, that's where you don't want to find yourself. So that would be pushing the box up there. So if I've done all my work, that box is ready to slide. That box of inventory, consumption units, is ready to slide downhill.
I love that, and I love the metaphor of consumption should have a sense of gravity to it. I mean, it's so true. And my suspicion is that there are probably a lot of people who are in a hurry and very eager to get the signed contract, right? Let's just get to, because that feels like success, right? But the reality is success isn't until consumption actually takes place. And so if we don't do some of these things in advance, to really, what are we doing? We're carrying the box up the ladder to the top of the slide, so that when they sign the deal, we can just give it a little bit of push, remove some barriers and some friction, and let it begin to roll downhill or slide downhill, right?
Yeah, and so there's an interesting dynamic I've kind of been working through the last couple of years, and that is POV to month to contract. That's a really great motion for kind of sometimes highly technical sales, or folks that are still kind of getting everybody on board. Now that's
Interesting.
sometimes from your sales manager that nope, they want to close that year deal. But you might be more successful if you spent the next, POV and did 3 months, a month to month. And here's why. Typically, you'll get a nice view of whether they're being successful out of kind of POV, pilot, whatever the names are. Again, it's just iteration to me, right? Continuum. If you can move to month, it solves a couple things. It first reverts that whole, I need to sign a year. Second, you can sometimes get a better consumption model out of it. Once they bring on a few more use cases. Oh, we thought all these use cases were big. Half of them were actually small. And they tend to start to build value on your own. And you can also get a sense of are you pushing that box uphill or downhill? When it starts to slide downhill, and then you say, hey, we'll do a year, you get a X amount of discount. Again, there's gravity, there's vacuum there, right?
Love that.
So I've had my AE and I have had to fight a few times to let folks go month to month in order to get a better long-term contract, right? And the nice thing is cloud does make that model pretty easy to do that. So I do like that motion, even though sometimes it feels a little odd, on the inner circle of sales.
Yeah. Well, and
Amazon, by the way, this is how Amazon made it. Amazon's goal for many years was let them consume monthly till it gets so painful it gets to a C level, and they say, no, we need 20% off. That was the model for years, right? So it kind of worked, I think, a little bit. But anyways, we tend to be under a little more of a microscope because we're not all AWS, obviously.
Right. Well, and the analogy that comes to mind is sort of you have a background in real estate in data. I have a background in real estate, and it sort of reminds me of the old, like lease to own options that you could put into place, right? Yeah. So, and this whole idea of month to month, basically what you're doing is you're building momentum, right? You're building momentum before you sign the contract, and you're making sure that there is, again, this idea of gravity. That's probably going to stick with me more than anything we've talked about. There's now gravity, right, on the consumption, and so it's less of an effort on their part and on our part. So absolutely love it. Folks, I'm speaking to Stephen Brown. He is a senior principal solution architect with Elastic. If you missed the opening, he was the #1 SA in Elastic a couple of years ago globally. He followed that with being the #1 in the Americas. He's actually someone that I have known for, I don't know the exact numbers, but for the moment, we're just going to say over a decade. He was actually my client when I was believe it or not, when I was out in the field, and he and I did some great work together for a number of years as, in a customer support relationship, if I can use that term. He actually wrote the foreword of my book, and he made the shift from a very successful leadership position in architecture and engineering and became an individual contributor SA and has just knocked it out of the park. We've been talking about consumption. Stephen, a moment ago, you mentioned your AE, and you mentioned that you all, first of all, when you were first paired, there was a little bit of headbutting, which, by the way, some of the best business relationships that I have now had a little bit of that. You now have a daily stand-up. How would you describe how you divide roles and responsibilities with your existing clients that you are helping to drive consumption and remove those barriers and create that gravity and that growth?
That is a great question. So Bob and I'll just be blunt. I have a lot of experience in this and that, but Bob has more experience in sales than I do, and he's the quarterback, and I'm fine with that. I don't have any ego about that. It's very easy to not have an ego with that when I work with somebody like Bob, who is
really good,
just successful. How can I say? And his strategy. We often joke that Bob's playing chess when most of the people we're on the calls with playing checkers. So there's a strategy, and he and I talk about the strategy from the business outcome perspective first. Like, what do we want? What do the customer want? That. And so I really value that, and I learned something all the time from him. Technology. I mean, when it comes to technology, Bob leans on me. We talk about what business value we want to demonstrate. I'm like, well, if we do A, B, and C with the technology, so that's clearly in my my wheelhouse, and we tease each other. Like, Bob will be on while I'm doing something low level, helping somebody hash through a YAML file so they can get the data. And in Slack, he's just like, my eyes are glazing over, this and that. And same when he's arguing over 5 lines on an NDA, I'm just, let me know when you're done. So there's very clear. In the middle, where we meet is really, we meet at the middle of the value of the customer, right? And, he's, my job, in fact, we often, like, we have calls without each other so that we can establish those relationships in open, free, and clear kind of way. Because they're, some tech folks don't want to open in front of the sales guy, and vice versa, right? So, and Bob is really good at bringing the conversation back up to the business value and how, when we're selling across an enterprise, there's economies of scale for financial, for training. Like, he's speaking C all the time. I'm speaking CI and CT most of the time, but I also have to talk to the platform owners and the practitioners, who are just as important. I think we all know there is a ton. So some worlds and products are top-down driven, but a lot of them are bottom up, middle up, whatever you want to call it. If you're not making great relationships with those key practitioners and those key platform owners, or understanding who the detractors are, either winning them over or navigating around it, that's our role together. But understanding the tech part is my role. So I'm lucky. I have a very nice continuum. I don't have the sales guy that's trying to do the tech part, and I'm not the tech guy. I mean, actually, that's a little unfair. I do a lot of the financial modeling because in my previous role as VP of engineering, I had to go in front of the finance committee. So you as a tech person should absolutely understand the finance and deals. Doesn't necessarily mean you architect it, but you need to understand that real deep. So that's kind of one of the points that we kind of overlap on. And I actually enjoy that part. There's the numbers part of it when they all line up. There's something nice about that. So I don't know if that answers anybody's questions or even your question, but that's kind of that, again, continuum that we have. There's clearly things that he does I'll never touch. There's things I do. But in the middle, if you're not working together on those, and it's funny, we run the board. We call it running the board, the stand-up. And it just happens. It's not even scheduled. Every morning, we both get our coffee. We're on Slack. We're ready to go. If we have meetings in the morning, we never go a day without talking. We talk multiple times a day, and we typically recap after every customer meeting. And it just happens now automatically. There's nothing mechanical about it. And I really enjoy and feel lucky that I have somebody that wants to work with me like that, because I'm kind of high energy, and so is Bob. So, it works out that way.
That's awesome. Well, and I love what you said. We come together. We align on value for the customer. I mean, to me, there are no more important words that you've said, I think, than those. Like, we align on customer value. And the other thing you mentioned, I think, is so true, is and it was said that in one of my workshops. And this was a workshop where I had AEs and SEs together. One of the AEs said, Chris, I need my SE to be able to, quote, run their own routes, right? I thought that was such a good analogy. And that's really what you're saying. You are developing relationships with the key technical stakeholders, the key SMEs within the organization that have influence internally, while Bob is building the relationships with the key executive sponsors and business stakeholders. You need to both be running your own routes. But I also love the fact that you said you sort of see him, I think you used the term quarterback. Like you see him, I don't know if you've ever heard me say this. I call it the 51-49 rule. They get 51% of the vote. I have 49% of the vote. We have an equal say, but they get the final vote because at the end of the day, it's at the end of the day, it's their neck that's on the line more so than mine for hitting the numbers and closing the deal. So
that's a good
so
way
love that.
That's very apropos. Absolutely.
So Steve, speaking of 5149, we are closing in. We just passed 49 and we're closing in on 50. I told you that you asked me how long we did this, and I said it's going to be 50 minutes before you know it. So here we are, 50 minutes. We are the landing gear is out, and we are going to land this plane here in just a minute. I know you're a busy man, and I know you've got stuff to do. We've talked a lot about consumption. We talked a little bit about your journey from a very well-established leadership role in engineering and architecture into pre-sales. Anything that you were hoping we might touch on, or you might have a moment to touch on that we just haven't had that you think is worth sort of closing out the conversation with?
So what you all can't see is I have my little stickies down here of things that are important to me,
You are such an architect and such an engineer.
What's important to my customers is important to me. If I left one thing, and that means you need to drive that back into your own organization and drive it out into theirs. Just recently, I'm working with one of the information architects, data architects at an enterprise company, and some of his users weren't happy with the way the platform was performing. There were some issues. Was it, this and that? And so, and they were offshore. So I got up, or actually I stayed up late, and I met with that team and helped, being an engineering manager and knowing our product really well, we walked through, and there was some organizational dynamics. So first, of course, I was the vendor, so there was probably a little bit of this, but turned out I've spent a lot of time in data, and I started to, oh yeah, we've run into that. Oh my gosh, yeah, that'll really come back and bite you. And once I started to empathize with that group, then we got down to the actual technical issues. Then we worked through the technical issues, and not only now have we, helped solve that problem, I formed a new relationship with what was a detractor. It's no longer a detractor. So this is not something special about me. It's working hard on those relationships. And when you run into something, the 5 whys, you got to figure out really why it's a blocker. Sometimes it's not the reason you see on top. So, I would just say what's important to your customers is important to you. So what's important to your customers is important to you. And so I don't stop on that. I guess why I'm harping is probably wrong. Why this feels really important right now to me is even my own company is we need to be 100% customer focused and things. And we are. I'm lucky. I work for a pretty good company. But Bob and I, we take that 100% between the two of us, and we're probably one of the more really driven customer focused. And meaning we drive back in and we break a little glass sometimes, but that's what earns our customers' trust. So I would say 1, that's the thing I'm living by. 2, I don't know, just something, Chris, and I've worked a long time ago. You kind of need to outwork your competition and outwork your barriers, right? If I run into something that doesn't work, I'm up that night figuring it out and getting it back to him the day after, the next day. So in consumption, we go back to those iterations. When I run into something consumption, it's not something I can wait a couple weeks to address. Like when they got hey, the transactions are running slow, or we couldn't get it configured, or SSO is not working, all those wonderful things, I'm going to work it that night or the next day, because every day I miss that consumption, it's more I have to make up. So my customers, outworking my competition and outworking the barriers, right? That's sometimes it's not someone else, it's something. Just outwork it, work the problem, the Martian, right? work the problem. For those of you, one of my favorite movies, just work the problem. But now with the consumption, unfortunately it's going to be more iterative. There's no, we made the sale, I'm moving on to my next ACV for a while until we get those CSMs or technical account managers or whatever in really driving at the same level as you. We've got more to do. That's kind of what I feel like. I got more to do these days.
So well said, Steve. And I just got to say, as I've been sitting back and listening to you, it is so satisfying for me to see the in essence the second or third career. I don't know how you would put it, but this next career that you have had made so successful. And to a certain degree, I feel like you have shattered a certain perception about this profession, that you can go from you had a large organization reporting to you. You were incredibly well respected in your role as a leader of architecture and engineering. And you made this leap into a profession that, some people might have thought of that as a step backwards, when in fact you're really a senior executive who is now in a position to help clients achieve success, but just in a different way. So I just cannot tell you how happy I am for you, how proud I am to be affiliated with you, to see your accomplishment and growth, and just really appreciate you sharing some words with us today. So
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Hey, what's better than helping customers every day? What's better than that, right?
Amen.
All right.
Amen.
Nice to see you.
Stephen, thank you for being here. Folks, thank you so much for joining. If you hung in till the end here live, if you caught us on the recording, thanks so much. Remember, you can actually follow on LinkedIn. You can follow #TechSalesAdvice if you want to get notified of these. And of course, you can go to techsalesadvisors.com to learn more about this organization. Stephen, is it safe to say that you would be more than happy to have people reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. My friend, hang around backstage just for a minute. I'll give you a parting gift. To everyone else, thanks so much. I think next Monday is the day before the 4th, so we will not be broadcasting next week, but I've got a special guest coming the week after that, so I hope to see you in a few weeks. Stephen, be well, my friend.
Yep. Nice.
Bye all.